All right, so move on to the next segment. I'll be sharing my thoughts on who Lamont Roach should fight next in the sport of boxing. Now, we obviously know that we wanted that Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach rematch. That will not be happening by the end of 2025. So Lamont Roach is looking for a new dance partner. And it seems like with Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis doing an exhibition fight, well, Lamont Roach is having a big name right now, going the distance and being the only man to have a draw with Gervonta Davis in Gervonta Davis's professional boxing fight. He's looking for the big time fights, the big time paydays to keep rolling, as he deserves, because he deserves to be in the spotlight after that impressive outing against Gervonta Davis in March. So I have three opponents that Lamont Roach could do business with and could be sharing the ring with next once he returns back to the sport of boxing. So option number one would be Lamont Roach versus Shakur Stevenson. Now, I think Lamont Roach versus Shakur Stevenson is actually a really big fight that could be made very soon at the lightweight division, and I think this could be the biggest fight to be made at the lightweight division in early 2026, with Shakur Stevenson giving Lamont Roach a shot at his WBC lightweight title. Now that Lamont can't share the ring with Tank because Tank is doing the exhibition fight with Jake Paul, this would be the next big fight that Lamont Roach can land at the lightweight division. And Lamont Roach did seem comfortable at 135 from coming up from 130. I mean, he looked explosive. He didn't have the knockout power, but he had a lot of counter shots and was winning the punching exchange with Gervonta Davis, throwing him off guard, throwing Tank off balance, something we're not accustomed to seeing with Tank in the sport of boxing. But styles makes fights. I think this would be a really entertaining fight between Shakur Stevenson and Lamont Roach. Both fighters do not have knockout power, but they possess enough power to keep their opponents off balance, landing some really effective shots. I think Shakur Stevenson's boxing skills, defensive skills, against Lamont Roach, who is a pretty solid defensive fighter. If you guys remember, he was rolling out that Philly shell against Gervonta Davis. Was really looking good in the high guard position as well against Tank defensively. He's a pretty solid defensive fighter. I mean, this is a fighter that is also a great counter puncher, great at making adjustments in between rounds. So I think a fight between Shakur Stevenson and Lamont Roach would be the next big fight that we could see at 135. And I'd be really excited to see this fight next in the sport of boxing between Shakur Stevenson and Lamont Roach. So I think option one is a really strong possibility of happening, with Shakur and Teofimo Lopez still trying to figure out if they're going to fight each other at 140 for Teo's WBO title. But we all know that Teofimo Lopez is accustomed to dropping the big ball in terms of getting the big fights. He bailed out. He was supposed to fight Devin Haney this month. Bailed out on that when negotiations were nearly done. There was rumors of him fighting Jaron Ennis at 147. That never materialized. So Teo's word is one thing, but him getting in the ring with these big names is another thing, because he's not good at negotiating at the negotiating table for these big fights. So Shakur versus Lamont Roach definitely has the potential to be next at 135, and both fighters have already expressed they want that fight very soon. Option number two would be Floyd Schofield. Now, I think Lamont Roach versus Floyd Schofield is a possibility of happening next at 135. It's a real option because the WBA will most likely strip Gervonta Davis of his WBA lightweight title very soon, since he's doing an exhibition against Jake Paul, who is nearly 100 pounds bigger than him. But the WBA did order Lamont Roach to have that rematch against Gervonta Davis based on how close that fight was, and then ended in a controversial draw. Floyd Schofield is actually the #1 ranked contender at the lightweight division for the WBA lightweight title. So Gervonta Davis technically has two mandatories. If you strip Tank of the WBA title, that leaves you in line to have Lamont Roach have a title shot and Floyd Schofield to have a title shot to fight for the vacant WBA lightweight title. But I think that's a fun fight at 135. It'd be a fun build-up, I think. Lamont Roach is proving that he's here to stay at 135. Again, he did look very comfortable at this division fighting Tank in the beginning part of the year. And he'd be fighting for a title that he probably should have right now. Floyd Schofield is 22, 23 years of age, proving why he's world championship material. Both are good counter punchers. Both fighters like to stand in the pocket and exchange some bombs with their opponents. I think this would be a good fight with both fighters adjusting well in between rounds. I think this would be a really good fight to have for the vacant WBA lightweight title. This is a real possibility of happening next in the sport of boxing. Now, option number three, and the final option, would be a possible fight with Gary Antoine Russell at 140 pounds. Now, This is a wild card. It could be Gary Antoine Russell, or Lamont could fight Richard Hitchens for the IBF title. But I could lean towards one of those two, but I'll just say, fighting wise, I think it'd be more entertaining to see Lamont Roach versus Gary Antoine Russell. Now, Gary Antoine Russell is the WBA super lightweight champion at 140 pounds. Actually won that title in the co-main event slot of the Gervonta Davis and Lamont Roach card back in March. So he has that WBA title ready for a world title defense very soon. Both are from the DMV. Both actually are from the DC area. So that'd be a huge fight to be made if that fight could be made in the DMV area for fans in the Baltimore, Virginia, or DC area. But I think that's a high-profile fight that Lamont Roach is actually looking for. He could be a two-division world champion. I think that's realistic goal for Lamont Roach at this point. He is still the WBA super featherweight champion at 130, but I don't know if there's any big-time fights that Lamont Roach will want to have to come back down to 130. So eventually he'll get stripped of the title. But meanwhile, Gary is a fighter that welcomes these big-time fights with open arms. He doesn't duck the smoke. He likes the squabbles. He likes to run the fades. So Gary's older brother, Gary Russell, is actually the older brother and has been calling out Lamont Roach for a fight, but Lamont Roach doesn't want to entertain that fight. Gary Russell just came back to the sport on the premiums of the Manny Pacquiao Mario Barrios undercard that took place a month ago. So I think it's unlikely for Lamont Roach to entertain a fight with the older brother, Gary Russell. But why not entertain a fight against Gary Antoine Russell for the WBA super lightweight title? I think that could be a fun fight. Both fighters like to exchange punches in the pocket. Both are great counter punchers. I think this would be a fun fight at 140. And I think a fight with him and Richard Hitchens is not off the table as well for the IBF title on 140 because they've been exchanging words on Twitter/X lately. So Lamont Roach is going to have a big fight whenever he returns back to the sport of boxing. He deserves it after that performance against Gervonta Davis. It just sucks. It can't be against Tank because Tank is entertaining this exhibition fight with Jake Paul. But I think Lamont Roach, out of those three opponents, he will likely fight one of them next. But those are my thoughts on who Lamont Roach should fight next when he returns back to the sport of boxing.